Hi, it's Anna. Welcome back to Books on the Go. It's been such a long time. I'm sorry between videos. I have been reading, but I just haven't got around to filming. So here we are. There's quite a large stack, but I have culled some of these so the video doesn't go on for 25 hours. But just a wrap up of what I've been reading in the last couple of months, and then I'll show you what's left to go on my TBR, and you'll be excited to see not too much. So the first book is Question 7 by Richard Flanagan, and Annie and I did this on the podcast, so I won't go into too much detail because you may have already heard us talk about this one. We both loved it. Annie really loved it. I took a bit longer to get into the swing of it because I thought this was his latest novel, Richard Flanagan, who wrote The Narrow Road to the Deep North, which I really loved, and he has written other non-fiction. But for some reason, I thought this was his latest novel, and I started to realise it was a memoir, and it actually covers similar territory for part of it as the novel The Narrow Road, because it talks about his father, who was a prisoner of war in World War II. But it's very wide-ranging. It goes way beyond that and back into the development of the atomic bomb. And there's a lot of a what-if scenario. What if that hadn't happened, or what if that hadn't ended the war, and then his father would probably have died, and then Richard wouldn't be born. And so there's all these interesting perspectives on his own life. And he talks about H.G. Wells, and then he also brings it right back to Tasmania, where he was born and raised, and a near-death incident that he had in the Franklin River in Tasmania. But as always, really masterfully, beautifully written. He tells such a great story and has such on-point use of language that it's always a thrill to read Richard Flanagan's work. So even though it took me a little bit longer just to get into the rhythm of this memoir, because it's not a typical memoir as well, it's doing a lot. I think it's a really masterful work. So I do recommend that one, Question 7. Another non-fiction, and this one I just finished yesterday, Emperor of Rome by Mary Beard. So this has been on my TBR since actually not that long, early in the year or late last year, because Mary Beard came to Adelaide Writers Week. She's an amazing classicist, and I just finished SPQR last year, which had been a long time on the TBR, which was about ancient Rome. Which I really don't know much about, and I'm trying to learn as I go. And Mary Beard has a very engaging writing style that is easy to read, even for the novice like me. But even still, I think you'd get a lot more out of her work if you had some background and some knowledge of these characters, because I feel like it's a lot. Every page, there's just a lot that I've never heard of or have to start from scratch, and so I find them quite dense, but it's not because of her writing. So this one is more the day-to-day lives of the emperors, and even their subjects, and some of the people around them, the ordinary people in ancient Rome, but actually the Roman Empire, which covered a lot more than just Italy, or what modern day Italy. And there are lots of aspects in Egypt and beyond, Britain, other countries and some of the emperors travelled. So she takes you through different aspects of their lives, their dinner parties, their banquets, their travels, their homes, their sports, the chariot races, the gladiator combat, all of these different things. I found it a bit confusing until I understood what she was doing, because it's very anecdotal. And so she'll say, for example, Nero did this and then Caligula did that, and it's a bit like when Hadrian went to Egypt, or it's a bit like this ancient banquet that this one hosted. And so it crosses over back and forth between different eras and different times and empires or emperors. So for someone like me who still doesn't really know their way around that era or that period in history, it was a little bit hard to follow, but I got the hang of it as it went on. So probably even better if you know a little bit about ancient history, but as always, really interesting and lively read. That's Emperor of Rome. And this was just a fun one that I really wanted to read because I haven't read one of his for a while. Close to Death by Anthony Horowitz, and he just does a great crime novel in the well, I was saying old style, but of course it's modern, and he always has a fresh take on it. But a classic murder mystery. The twist is that this is a Hawthorne book. I haven't read one previously, but Hawthorne is the detective, but Anthony Horowitz is a character in the novel, so he's the sidekick for Hawthorne, and it's not exactly himself, but a fictionalized version of himself. So that's a fun take on the genre. And this one's set in Richmond in a gated community where everybody absolutely hates the new neighbour, who is obnoxious, loud, and completely deserves to die, as that's the sort of setup. And so therefore the question is who killed him, because they all wanted him to go. So that was a really fun read. Recommend. Close to Death. This one I got for Christmas and I was really looking forward to it, and it did not disappoint. The Square of Sevens by Lorr Shepherd Robinson. So this is one of those really fun, sweeping historical novels that you get swept away in the world, and it's set, I think, in I want to say the 18th century, the 1700s. I can't quite remember. I think it's Georgian England, and Red is the protagonist. She's an orphan, and she does fortune telling using this particular system with cards. So you can read the cards and they tell the fortune of the person. It's an ancient skill that she has, and so it's popular at parties, and she gets in with this sort of aristocratic family, and then she's also learning her own ancestry and her own family story, and it becomes quite a race against time because she becomes a target essentially. So it's got really good suspense and action and great characters, really well written, and just one of those fabulous stories that you just sink into, and it's interesting but also fresh but also comforting to read. So that is The Square of Sevens. And then one more that was very interesting, and that's The Secret Life of Groceries. And this is a really well written investigative journalist or non-fiction book by Benjamin Lorr, and he goes behind the scenes in America of what ends up on our supermarket shelves and how it gets there, and what the industries are feeding what our shopping habits, I suppose. And it includes things like the transport, so the big truck industry, and that is just an amazing chapter where he goes Gonzo style and sits in a big truck for a couple of days, and it just sounds horrendous, but really, really interesting. And he has a compassionate view. It gives you a completely different perspective on, the life of these trucking contractors and how they are treated and as cogs in the wheel. And then he looks into the food industry itself and some of the ways that food ends up on the shelf and whether we should really be eating it and all sorts of things. Really, really interesting, and it will make you look at things in a different light. And again, living in Australia, I'm never quite sure how much of this applies here. I can only assume there are similar issues here and hopefully not as pronounced, but because I think the agriculture industry is a little bit different in the States, but even still quite a provocative and confronting read, but very important. So that's The Secret Life of Groceries. And then a couple of DNFs, because we love a DNF, and these were books that looked really great and then I just couldn't get into them. So one is The Continental Affair by Christine Mangan, and that's two strangers meet on a train, but in fact they're not strangers, and he's meant to be chasing her, but she's more complicated than he thought from memory. And it's all set across Europe, and I love a mystery set on a train. I love books set in Europe. What could go wrong? This has got all the elements that I really love. I love the cover. Everything is perfect, and it's just very slow, and I couldn't get into it. And I read a few reviews, which I sometimes do when I think I'll bail on a book. I'll just look at a few reviews to see if maybe it gets better or maybe I'm missing something. And they said, a lot of them just said it's a really slow burn, and quite a few said what I was feeling at the time, that it never really picks up. And the problem, I don't mind a slow burn, but the problem was I just didn't care about the characters. And so to have a lackluster, slow-paced book where you're also not invested in the characters, or you're not getting that character depth, or not for me anyway, then it just had to go. So we let that go. Continental Affair, beautiful book, but not the one for me. And then another one that I was disappointed in, but it has been popular, is Murder on Lake Garda by Tom Hindle. So again, I love everything about this setup. It's a big wedding, high society wedding in a villa on Lake Garda with the man is marrying, I've forgotten his sort of status, if you like, but he's marrying an influencer. Then I think she's the one who might be murdered, or that's the suggestion at the beginning. She's missing, the bride, and then it's all the characters, the guests of this, and it's so exclusive. It's sort of a closed circle murder where there's only maybe 20 people who are at this villa or at the wedding, and so one of them perhaps has committed murder, and they're all of course trapped on the island, because then there's only so many ways to get off the island, and so all the elements are there for an intriguing mystery. And again, I found this as well with A Fatal Crossing, Tom Hindle's earlier book, where everything is what I want in a murder mystery: the location, the promise of these interesting characters, and the setup, and then it just seems a bit turgid or laboured or pedestrian in the writing somehow. That sounds terrible, but I think in this one I didn't like any of the characters. They all seemed so unlikable, and I do think even though people are wealthy, you can still find something charming about them, or something charismatic or funny or sympathetic or something. And in this case, they were all quite dreadful to each other in a way that seemed one-dimensional at the bit that I got up to. And I'm sure that possibly changes, but for that time being, I just didn't really feel like spending quite a few pages in their company. So I let that go as well. That was the Murder on Lake Garda. So I don't know how it ends. Let me know if you've read it or any of these, and whether I should reconsider. Now, exciting, I'm going to show you what's left of my TBR, and it is this. 3 books only. I'm so excited. So at the moment I'm reading History's Angel by Anjum Hassan, which I'm really enjoying, set in India. And again, this was an author who came to Adelaide Writers Week, and in fact I missed the session, which I'm disappointed about, but the podcasts are now available, so I will seek that out. But I might read this first. And this is about Alim, I think it's Alim. I haven't got my glasses on, I can't tell you for sure, but a history teacher, and he's married to, I think, Tahira, and it's got a nice sense of humour underlying it, because he's a hapless sort of man in the sense that he goes about his life. He hasn't really succeeded wildly as a history teacher, but he's passionate about history, and he seems like a really good teacher, but everyone else seems to be shooting for the stars, and he just can't really be bothered doing extra study or extra work. And his wife is super ambitious and doing an MBA and wants to really get ahead and jump on the bandwagon of all the new industry and new money that's there to be made in India. And he's got his doubts about that, and but he's trying to support her and trying to stay on the good side of his parents, who are mildly disappointed in him always, but they're there for him, and then it will progress from there. I don't know. very early stages, just at the beginning, so I don't know what happens. I have got to the scene, which was in the blurb, where he goes on a school excursion and a student goads him and is just really difficult, and he twists the student's ear, and that's going to cause problems. So I think that's where it starts to go downhill for him, but I'm really enjoying it. So that's History's Angel, and it's had lots of great reviews as well. And then we have PYRE by Paramol Murugan, and this again was an Adelaide Writers Week author who again I missed, and it's I think a Tamil author. I think that's her background, but I'll let you know once I get to it. So I can't really say much more about PYRE, but looking forward to that. And it's just a nice edition. It's got those French flaps and just a good handbag sized book, so I will get onto that one. And then last, but has been longer in the TBR, the Swan book by Alexis Wright. And Alexis Wright just won the Stella Prize in Australia for 2024 for her book Praiseworthy, which is her new novel. And it's, Annie says, really long, about 800 pages. And I said to Annie, we were talking about should we do it on the podcast, and I said, look, I have to finish the Swan book because it's been on my TBR for so long, and before I can tackle her next one, or there are other books in between, but I'd like to read Praiseworthy. So this is, I actually started reading it. You can see where I got to, and her language, she's so innovative and so playful, and her language is incredibly rich and fun and a joy to read, but also it's doing a lot, and the story is quite challenging because it's not a linear Western style narrative. It includes some of the supernatural, and it comes at the story from different sides and around and about. And so it's for my little brain, it's quite challenging to read. And I was finding that I was putting it down, picking it up and then putting it down again. But I do want to have another go. So the Swan book is coming up as well, and that will be the end of the TBR if we don't include the front room, which has lots of books I haven't read yet. But this is the sort of shelf that is my day-to-day shelf that new books go into and have been for the last 5 or 10 years. So that will be a miracle. Let's see how we go. And that's assuming I don't buy any new books between now and finishing the Swan book and PYRE. So I'll keep you posted. Let me know what you've been reading, and I will see you soon. Bye for now.